On June 30th, 2020, in Hong Kong, China, the police raised a purple banner informing protesters, "This is a police warning. You're displaying flags or banners with intent such as secession or subversion, which may constitute offenses under the Hong Kong national security law." Chaos ensued, with protesters yelling, police using pepper spray, and searching people. Soon after, the first arrest was made under this new law. The police had found a Hong Kong independence flag inside a man's bag, not even being displayed, and they arrested him just for having it. The fact that he had had it was enough to allow the police to arrest him. In just one of the pro-democracy demonstrations, 300 people were arrested for violating this law. As of February 2021, over 10,000 people have been arrested, but protesters still continue in their efforts. Okay, so what happened that led up to this law being passed?
Okay, so to really understand, we need to take it back far back to when Hong Kong was under British control. During the First Opium War in 1841, China ceded the island of Hong Kong to the British with the signing of the Tripoli Convention, an agreement seeking to end the First Anglo-Chinese conflict. The Opium War was between the Qing dynasty and Western powers. In 1839, Britain had invaded China and they were first attacked Hong Kong, and after that, they put pressure on the Qing government. The Qing gave over Hong Kong to Britain. In 1898, Britain was granted 99 more years of ownership of Hong Kong, and recently that expired. Hong Kong was given over as a peace offering, and it was under Britain's control for over 150 years. After years of negotiation, Britain gave over Hong Kong back to China in exchange for a pledge that China will preserve Hong Kong's capitalist and self-autonomous system.
So why was Britain granted the 99 years of ownership?
China basically leased Hong Kong as part of their new territories to Britain for money since they didn't need it.
So how did Hong Kong fare under British rule?
It was doing great. In the late 1950s, it became an economic hub for trading and export and manufacturing. It was also popular for migrants from mainland China who were suffering from poverty.
So then their term was up and Hong Kong was returned to China?
Right, but not exactly. In the 1980s, as the deadline for the 99-year lease approached, Britain and China began talking about the future of Hong Kong, with the communist government in China arguing that all of Hong Kong should be returned to Chinese rule. The agreement was that China gets Hong Kong, but China isn't allowed to interfere with Hong Kong's independence and capitalist structure. The two sides signed a treaty in 1984 providing that Hong Kong will return to China in 1997 under the principle of one country, two systems. This means that they are the same country, but have little to do with each other's government. This is a quote. As a result, Hong Kong has its own legal system and borders, and rights including freedom of assembly, free speech, and freedom of the press are protected. For example, is one of the few places in Chinese territory where people can commemorate the 1989 Tiananmen Square crackdown, where the military opened fire on unarmed protesters in Beijing.
So I heard that China recently passed a new law that allows the police to put down protests, and further, that being pro-democratic in Hong Kong is now legal. Is that correct?
Yes. So on June 30th, 2020, a new national security law was put into effect for Hong Kong from China. This law was created to end protests in Hong Kong, even though Hong Kong is supposed to be under one country, two systems, giving them much more freedom than the rest of China. Even though this law is mainly directed towards protests, the language it uses is so broad that almost anything can be seen as against China could get you in major trouble.
So what is the specific language that uses?
It outlaws four major offenses: separatism, subversion, terrorism, and collusion with foreign countries, which is so vague that law enforcement could hold many people accountable for a broad spectrum of different illegalities.
So when did you first start hearing about this law?
Even before the law was put into place, people started hearing about it. In fact, Chinese government had attempted to implement this law 17 years earlier, but failed due to major backlash. Around May 2020, petitions were circulated in Hong Kong expressing concerns about what might happen with this law in the near future.
So, how do people react to the prospect of this new law?
People were astonished because it was inconceivable that China would ever actually put this law into place because they have no place in doing that, and because it was contradictory to the argument made when to the agreement made when Hong Kong was given back to China, which said that Hong Kong would have its certain freedoms.
Why is China allowed to do this if Hong Kong has these freedoms?
Well, they're not really allowed to do this, which is why there's such a backlash because China is abusing its authority over Hong Kong.
So, there are people who are protesting and fighting this new law?
Yes, they're trying to preserve their democratic system and keep rights like freedom of protest and press.
So, what's causing the tension that started these riots?
The feud between Hong Kong and mainland China is primarily caused by their different ideas and values. Hong Kong wants to be autonomous and have rights, while China wants Hong Kong to be under their control.
Could you elaborate on that?
Sure. Many Hong Kongers' response to the law and recent events is leaving the country, mostly to Britain. People are leaving because they fear being punished for being pro democratic. They believe they can find a better life out of China's reach, and some believe that the conflict will affect their children's schooling, and the emigration rates are rising. As of the beginning of this month, February, thousands have already left, and due to over 5 million Hong Kongers becoming eligible for visas, the numbers are expecting to climb to hundreds of thousands. Some people are even taking down social media posts and asking friends to delete texts they've seen because they think it might come back to haunt them regarding this law.
So, the people protesting is a prime example of their resisting China, and China enforcing this law, anyways, shows that they ultimately want control over Hong Kong.
Exactly. Chinese authorities are imposing laws on Hong Kong similar to that of the rest of the country. They're making it legal for the police to put down protests in whatever way they see fit, and that wasn't allowed under Hong Kong's previous system.
So, tell me a bit more about how China is enforcing this law.
Okay, so during protests, police are using tear gas, water cannons, and shields to protect themselves and fight. Some protesters are even using flashlights and colorful lights to blind the police. Protesters are also using umbrellas to protect themselves from the tear gas. The Washington Post reported, "If we don't come out today to fight back, this may be the last time," said Chris, a 19-year-old protester who spoke on the condition that only his first name may be used because he had been arrested once before participating in an illegal protest. Maybe tomorrow Hong Kong will be China, and we can't even say a single word of criticism on the internet without being arrested. We see from this statement that the protesters are not stopping, even though the police are fighting back. The fact that police are enforcing things so violently, and the fact that protesters are countering, underscores the tension between Hong Kong and China.
So, ultimately, Hong Kong just wants to go back to how things were before the security law, shown by their resistance during the protest, such as still protesting even with the police coming down on them. Also shown by Hong Kongers' fear of China's new enforcements, even to the extent of things they said in private messages years ago. In contrast, China wants to control Hong Kong by limiting their freedoms and conforming them to how the rest of China is. This is highlighted by how aggressively they're fighting against protesters and how they made their law vague enough to arrest whomever they please. In the future, there may be potentially a civil war or even an international war if other countries, such as Great Britain or America, decide to step in. But hopefully, China will avoid this new security law, or at least be more lax about it. Realistically, though, odds are that things will get worse before they get better. Have a good night, and thank you for watching.